Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Monsoon's Twilight Briefings. My name is James Fletcher. I'm a wealth advisor at Evans & Partners here in Melbourne with an interest in biotech. I've done this a few times. Today we are very pleased to have Dimerix and Neuren, who have presented here before. Both are in the orphan drug space, which has certain advantages, higher pricing levels, faster track of regulation. So we'll start off with Dr. Nina Webster, the CEO of Dimerix. Just so you know also, these sessions are being recorded, so you'll be, any questions or anything you have to say, just be aware of that. So I welcome Dr. Nina Webster. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming this afternoon. I appreciate your time. So for those who are not familiar with Dimerix, we are an ASX-listed company. Ticker code is DXB, and we are working on diseases predominantly in the inflammatory space. So that includes kidney disease and respiratory disease, the key focus. Founded in 2004, been around for a little while, we listed in 2016. Just like to note the forward-looking statements. I know you've just read those very, very carefully. Oh, I left them on there a bit too long. So, just in terms of a summary of our snapshot and key focus, I mentioned before we're focusing on inflammatory diseases. The first flagship program that we're looking at is in a late-stage Phase 3 development program. And what we mean by that is Phase 3 being the last study before we go to market. We have a Phase 3 study design that has what we call interim analysis points, and that means that we will get data in the near term, and we will come back to that in just a moment. We have a number of advanced negotiations with potential partners as well. Again, I will circle back to this, but of course once you enter into a Phase 3, it becomes a very attractive proposition for pharma companies as you get closer to market. We have orphan drug designation, and for those who are familiar with Dimerix already, or Neuren in fact, orphan drug designation comes with it a number of different benefits. So we have the orphan drug designation in US, Europe and UK, and that gives us that exclusivity for 7 years in Europe and 10 years in, 10 years in Europe, 7 years in the US, get that the right way round. I'll be touching on the global market as we go through this as well, but needless to say it's a very attractive market because whilst this is an orphan disease that we'll be talking about, it's not ultra rare. So there's a really good number of patients out there for this space. Went this way. So what we have as well is what we call a significantly de-risked program. And what we mean by that is having gone into a Phase 3 study, it means that we've already demonstrated efficacy data. We have Phase 2 efficacy where we saw some really encouraging data coming through. We have a really strong safety profile. We've already demonstrated in all of the studies we've conducted to date, and that's been 4 studies across this space, including some additional COVID studies that were run in the last couple of years, and we've seen no serious adverse events related to our drugs. So it's a really strong safety profile. Put those together and it means that we've significantly de-risked, especially when you put that into perspective of a Phase 1 asset that has yet to prove that efficacy and or safety profile. We've completed all of our non-clinical program so far, and we've already had FDA confirmation that there is no more safety or toxicology studies to be done. We've completed that. It's all going to come down to completing the clinical study and the efficacy outcome for those. We've also completed our commercial manufacturing scale-up. So when we go into a Phase 3, obviously we take in our final formulation of our drug. It means that we've also completed or are close to completing what we call registration batches, and those are the batches that demonstrate to the regulatory agencies that we have made it to the right quality and the right standard for commercial manufacturing. And again, we have confirmation from the FDA that our proposed package is appropriate for marketing approval. If I just jump to the next slide. Sorry, this is not going on first click. So with that development pipeline, I mentioned before in those inflammatory diseases, the key one that we want to focus on is called focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, and I challenge anyone to say that fast after a glass of wine. It is a rare type of kidney disease, and we will touch on that again in a moment. Coming in behind that, we had diabetic kidney disease. Diabetic kidney disease is obviously a big growing market. As the rate of diabetes grows, there's around 60% of those with diabetes have diabetic kidney disease. So it's a very rapidly growing indication as well. And then coming in behind that, we have DMX 700 in chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Now, COPD is the third largest cause of death in the world. And of the top 5 causes of death, the only one with increasing mortality rates. There are no treatments for this either. They treat the symptoms, not the disease. And so this again is a very clear unmet need in the market, for which we saw some very promising preclinical data last year. So targeting orphan disease. Some will be already familiar with this if they've been following Neuren and Dimerix previously, but just in that nutshell, when we look at orphan disease, we have a number of different incentives to develop. Because it is a slightly smaller market than your standard, such as diabetic kidney disease, which is huge, there's a smaller number of patients in this space. So as an incentive to develop in this space, we get what's called orphan drug pricing. Orphan drug pricing is much higher than it would be for the standard drugs, and that is your return on your investment for the development. In this space, there is another drug for another type of rare kidney disease that's just been developed that's going to retail for $120,000 per patient per year. So it's a very lucrative opportunity there, commercially attractive opportunity for Dimerix. It also means that we can look at what's called accelerated approval. Now, what this means in this space is that when we get to our second interim analysis, which we will talk about in a moment, we may be able to go to market halfway through the study. And what happens is you then carry the study on in the background while you're on market making revenue. And again, that's an incentive where you have an orphan disease with a clear unmet need, given there are no drugs approved anywhere in the world for FSGS at the moment. We have the marketing exclusivity I touched on before, which means that's the period of time that no generic company can challenge your patents or enter the market. So again, that's your guaranteed period without being challenged. That's also a very commercially attractive opportunity. And then, of course, we have the regulatory open dialogue with FDA, EMA, MHRA, which are the different regulatory agencies around the world, which again gives us incentive to make sure that our design of our study is correct, the endpoints are captured correctly. Oh, how did this get in here? Neuren. So I'm just jumping onto your slide now, John. This was just up here as a bit of an analogy that you can see what happens in the orphan disease space. I've made John go red, it should be me. What happens in the orphan disease space when you actually get to market. Again, a very commercially opportunity for the company, for the investors, and particularly when you get to market, treating an undermet disease for those patients as well. So you can see with Neuren, the same principle of the orphan drug pricing, getting to market relatively attractive, and you can see the market increase. And I'm sure, John, you're going to show the same slide in just a moment.
Don't need to, yeah.
So what is FSGS? So FSGS means some sections of the kidney filtering units are scarred. And what happens over time is more and more of those kidney filtering units become scarred. You see the picture on the right-hand side of this graph. Eventually what happens is you have enough of that cell scarred that it no longer can filter the blood, and you end up in kidney failure when you run out of cells in this space. There is very much an unknown cause of what does cause FSGS, but it does affect children as young as 2 years old as well as adults. Hence, we have been asked to look at children in our study as well as adults. Sadly, you get kidney failure within about 5 years of diagnosis. And if you are fortunate enough to get a kidney transplant, around 60% get reoccurring FSGS in the transplanted kidney. So it is a really poor prognosis because there are no drugs approved anywhere in the world. Now, I think the other thing to note here is that this is not an ultra-rare disease, as I mentioned before. So it's about 220,000 sufferers globally of FSGS at the moment. So again, if you put that into perspective with your orphan drug pricing, it makes it a very commercially attractive opportunity. So jumping on to that unmet need, what are those drivers in that market? Because at the moment, there isn't really a market for FSGS, or should I say, there's not a recognised global dollar figure for market, because there is no drug approved specifically for FSGS. Patients are treated for other conditions or treated off-label, not approved for FSGS. So what the drivers will be is, one is this prevalence of FSGS is genuinely increasing. The second thing is the diagnosis and the diagnostic tests that are being developed for FSGS are growing. But also, as companies like Dimerix develop products for FSGS, again, that in itself develops this market and grows this market. So the estimation, a number of FSGS reports out there at the moment estimate that it'll be over $3 billion in just the 7 major markets by 2032. So that is a huge growing market opportunity. So only 2 products in development for phase 3 at the moment. Now, the first one is us. We're developing what's called a CCR2 antagonist, and I'll touch on that in just a moment. The second product is a product called sparsentan. Sparsentan is an angiotensin receptor blocker. Now, the great thing for us is there's 2 different things actually. One is, even if they get to market ahead of us, we are actually complementary to them because they actually work on a different pathway, and I will touch on how that works in just a moment. The second piece is that whilst they've been approved for a different indication, not FSGS, what they have been approved for with sparsentan carries what's called a black box warning. Now, that black box warning basically outlines the safety concerns of their drug, which include liver toxicity and fetal toxicity. And sadly, that means that any patient that has to be prescribed with sparsentan, the doctor must be specially trained to prescribe it, but also the patient must be seen at least every month to monitor for those safety concerns, which will severely restrict their market. So again, a really big opportunity for Dimerix in this market. So how does the DMX-200 work? And I think the key thing to work on here is the 3 key mechanisms that cause sclerotic kidney disease. So if you look at point number 1 to start with, that is the and hypertension or hyperfiltration. And that means the kidney is working really, really hard, and that builds up a lot of pressure in the kidney. As the pressure is built up in those kidney vessels, you come to point number 2. The ongoing pressure causes inflammation. Inflammation, again, is ongoing and persistent, and this causes fibrosis or scarring of those cells. So you can imagine, as you get scarring and fibrosis of these cells, you get to point number 3, you lose those cells. As those cells die off, you now come back to point number 1, there are less cells, so they have to work even harder, causing more pressure, causing more inflammation, causing more cell death. So you can imagine that as you go around this cycle, you go around faster and faster as you have fewer and fewer cells to effectively filter the blood. So we know that the current standard of care is actually an antihypertensive. It's a blood pressure medication. And that works on point number 1. And that is also what the drug sparsentan is being developed for, is an antihypertensive at point number 1. Our drug, CCR2, DMX-200, works on point number 2. It's an anti-inflammatory. So what it will do is dial down that inflammatory response and prevent that scarring and fibrosis. But what was really important is recognizing how the 2 work together. And that is the dimer in Dimerix. There's 2 things working together. If you block the first receptor, the angiotensin receptor, but not the CCR2, you get what's called transactivation. It basically means more signal comes through that first receptor. Think of it like a 3-lane motorway now becoming a 5-lane motorway. The signal comes through. The reverse is true as well. If you block the second receptor and not the first, you end up getting this 5-lane motorway open up and more signal coming through. It's only when you block both of those at the same time do you see a complete response. You must knock out both at the same time. And that is why our drug is given to patients already taking the angiotensin receptor blocker. So it actually works on point number 1 and 2. So DMX-200 is an oral capsule. It's given as a single capsule twice daily, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. So it's a really simple dosing regime, and it's what's called a small molecule. And again, what that means is a relatively straightforward manufacturing process, no biologics here at all. We've completed a number of different clinical trials in this space to date, and each of them have demonstrated a really strong safety profile, but also in our phase 2, some very encouraging efficacy data, hence moving into the phase 3 clinical design. What we did announce in the last month or so is the significant new interest in our partnering. The moment we've moved into a phase 3 clinical design, it means that we are on that home straight towards commercialization. And that has, of course, opened up a huge number of interest from global and regional pharmaceutical companies. So we do have term sheets on the table noting that they are non-binding and subject to board approval, but they are on the table that we are currently negotiating. So some, again, real opportunity, given that it is not our intention to take the drug to market ourselves. Our intention here is to partner this product and work with the partner to take it, who is far more expert in their area in sales and marketing than we would be. So the phase 3 study itself, this is, I know there's quite a few things on this slide, so we'll work away from left to right, but essentially what we have here is a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study. So that means it's a fairly standard design. Every patient gets randomized 1-to-1 drug or placebo, and we manage that. Now, as these patients are recruited, they then have to complete what's called a stabilization period on that background angiotensin receptor blocker that I spoke about before. So they get recruited onto the study, they must complete their screening and make sure they meet their inclusion-exclusion criteria. Then they have to complete their stabilization before they then get rescreened and enter into the study. Now, we started our recruitment in May last year, was our first patient. We currently are recruiting in 11 different countries in 70 clinical sites. So it is a big study. It is a very big study. These patients, as they come through this, the ultimate endpoint is what we call eGFR, that is kidney function, at 2 years. But because we have this orphan drug designation, we've been able to build in 2 different interim analysis points. The first one is expected towards the end of this year, and that is looking at the clinically and statistically meaningful difference between drug and placebo. So that will tell us, are we on track to meet our endpoints? Are we seeing a difference between drug and placebo? And this de-risks it not just for the investors, but also de-risks it for the patients as well, making sure that the drug is doing something for them. Then we move to the second interim outcome, and this is after 144 patients. So the first one's 72, second one's 144. If we see compelling data at that second interim endpoint, we may be able to submit for marketing approval at that point. The study carries on to the end in the background, but it means that we could be profitable at this point just here. And then moving through to the final endpoint, which would be eGFR at 2 years, which is again kidney function. So coming back to exactly where I started, that we have a very clear opportunity here with a late-stage phase 3 clinical asset. We've seen from Neuren, and you're going to hear more from John in just a moment, of what can happen when you get to market with these phase 3 clinical assets. We have a near-term potential clinical outcome in our clinical study, and we look forward to updating the market on that in the near future. So on that, I think I will pause and hand over for any questions.
Thank you, Nina. Are there any questions to start off? Yes.
Nina, where did the technology come from? Where does that come from originally?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So originally it came out of WA, so it is Australian technology. We started with a technology, it's a platform technology that looks at what we call GPCR, G protein coupled receptor. And it's basically an assay that looks at how the drug is working at the cellular level. So for a number of years, Dimerix was actually a fee-for-service company providing big pharma, screening their drugs and letting them know what they were hitting and which indications it would work. And using that, we identified our own opportunities, the first one being DMX-200. To that point, we actually have a number of other identified opportunities that we would add to our pipeline as and when we have the resources and funding to do so.
Did I hear you correctly that FSGS happens in children as young as 2 years old?
That's correct. Children is 2 years old.
Right, so how do they get FSGS? Because adults is from hypertension, I guess. But how does the children
It's
get
actually unknown, even in adults. So there are different types of FSGS. There's FSGS of primary FSGS, FSGS of unknown cause, genetic FSGS, and secondary FSGS. Now, secondary FSGS is the easiest one to explain because it's caused by something secondary such as AIDS or hepatitis B. Genetic FSGS, there's a genetic disposition to that, but the primary and unknown cause that they essentially don't know, which is why when you get that transplant, 60% get this reoccurring FSGS and nobody knows why. It's a circulating factor within there. But sadly with the young children, they end up with nephrotic syndrome fairly quickly. It's fairly aggressive. So anything we can do, we're looking forward to helping these patients. Hence, earlier this year we announced that we would be bringing adolescents into this study, so that's from 12 to 17. And then following that, we'll look at the younger cohort of children as well.
So once you're on DMX-200, are you on it for life?
Yes, you are on it until either death or your kidneys fail. It's what we call the chronic indication.
Funding for the trials, how's that? Is that organised, or you need a capital raise in between?
Yeah, really good question. So there's a couple of things there. First of all, at the end of the last quarter, we had 5.7 million in the bank. We also did an advance on the first 6 months of our R&D of 2.8 million during this last quarter. Our 4C will come out next week. And so you'll get a better sense of where we're at with that. But essentially, what we've got is a number of different options there. One is we've got the ability to draw down on our R&D. The second thing is we are in these partnering discussions, which have some real opportunity there as well.
Having a trial in 70 different countries and a number of patients, what challenges do that lead to? Because obviously you need to get consistency in a result, and people that do clinical trials different ways in different countries.
No, the protocol is the same in every country. So it's 11 countries, and across those 11 countries there are 70 sites.
Sorry.
That's okay. So 70 sites in 11 different countries. But to your point, we have to go through 11 countries' regulatory processes, which we've done. It is the same protocol and same inclusion-exclusion criteria in every single country, and every single country that we selected is appropriate for example, FDA approval, EMA approval from a quality perspective. The other component there is we use what's called a CRO, a clinical research organisation called IQVIA. IQVIA is the largest CRO in the world, and so they have boots on the ground in every country and support us on that study, keeping that going. But to your point, there's always challenges in running these. COVID is not an excuse anywhere in the world anymore. However, it does impact a huge amount of things, including recruitment. We have real case examples where a patient's due to come in today and then they can't because they're sick, but the rescheduling can take 5 weeks. So it is an impact there.
Thanks, Selena. Can I start? I might have missed it on your slide, but you were saying that the drug is synergistic potentially with sparsentan. So does that imply you need to prove superiority in the combination trial, or how does it work?
No, because our clinical study is on patients who are on any angiotensin receptor blocker. So in our study, they can be on any background ARB. Sparsentan is another ARB. So from that perspective, we can actually, if for example, sparsentan got approved this year, we can actually take patients on sparsentan into our study.
And do you need to show superiority?
No, we don't, because we're a completely different mechanism of action.
Thank you.
I think we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you put your hands I would like to segue over to Neuren now, but it's already been done for me. So, John Pilcher from Neuren. Neuren's been a wonderful success. I think yesterday the share price hit an all-time high and had a market capitalisation of $1.82 billion. So, to hear all about it, John, thank you.
So, great to see you all. Thanks very much for coming. Great to be here. It's obviously a very exciting time to be talking to you. So last month, first ever product approved by the FDA for Rett syndrome, and then just earlier this week it was launched, became available in the US through our partner Acadia. Again, a fantastic moment for us and for the Rett syndrome community. You couldn't get a much more worthy cause than what we're trying to do here. It's not been easy. It's been a 10-year journey for Neuren. I've been part of that whole journey, so obviously a massive moment for us to get to that point. But I've said before, we're not resting on our laurels. We've got a huge amount still to do and a lot of very exciting stuff still to come, particularly with our second drug that I'll talk about. So, but obviously, a great time for us at the moment. Now, let me try and work out a bit of this. Is it the arrows, Millie?
Yeah, arrows to the right. You've got to point it at a computer.
Okay. Oh, I see. Not on the screen.
That's all I
Thank
can
you.
do.
Yeah, okay. So I think for a long time now, I felt that we've got a very nice proposition for investors, which is this combination between some very significant near-term cash flows from that lead program, that Rett syndrome program, but not only that, the potential big increase in value from our second drug. And I think having both of those things makes it a very attractive proposition. Obviously, the first bit, the near-term cash flows, have become more and more certain now with the things that have happened recently, and that puts us in a great position to then pursue the second element of the story. So, as with me, I'm going to point out there's going to be some forward-looking statements in the slides and what I say that could have different outcomes. Okay, so I know some of you will be very familiar with Neuren and some not so, so I'm going to sort of try and cater to both here. very quick overview of where we've got to. So, as I said, we have our lead product just been launched in the US, first and only treatment for Rett syndrome. Big cash flows coming from that, 73 million US plus royalties plus additional milestone payments, which I'll go through in a minute. We hold on to rest of the world rights and we're in advanced partnering discussions around that. And then we have the second drug in phase 2 trials with the first lot of results coming later this year. We also have $40 million of cash without these cash flows coming from Acadia, so we made sure that we were very well funded to do what we needed to do with our second drug, whatever happened with the first drug. But now, of course, those cash flows are going to come in on top of that. So just for those of you who are not familiar with what we do, just a very quick explanation. So Neuren focuses solely on neurodevelopmental disorders. I think actually we're the only company in the world probably that solely focuses on that, which I think gives us some unique expertise. So we're trying to treat 6 different syndromes. The names of them are across the top of that slide there, and the genetic mutation that causes them is underneath. Interesting, they're all caused by completely different genetic mutations, and yet when you look at the kids, clinically they look very similar, and unfortunately it's a terribly wide range of debilitating problems that they suffer from, affect just about every aspect of life: walking, talking, breathing, sleeping, eating, hand use, cognitive function, just everything. Fortunately, they're not sort of progressive, so the kids don't all die in childhood like in some things, but it does mean it's a huge lifelong burden on both the patients and their families. There's no approved treatments for any of this other than our treatment for Rett syndrome, so massive unmet need here, and that's, all of that is what Neuren's trying to do something about. So we have 2 drugs that are trying to treat these conditions, and they're both trying to fix an underlying problem in these disorders, which isn't the genetic mutation. We don't fix that, but all of them share this feature where the connections between the brain cells don't form properly when the brain's developing. That means the signalling isn't happening properly, and that governs everything in your body, and that's why you get this terribly wide range of problems. So both our drugs are trying to improve that underlying problem in the brain and hopefully have an impact across the syndrome. So these drugs are not targeting any one of these symptoms, they're targeting the whole syndrome. So this is where our pipeline sits. So obviously the top one in Rett syndrome is on the market. A few things to understand from here: 2 drugs, Trofinetide, now called Debut, and NNZ-2591. Debut is partnered with Acadia Pharmaceuticals, a NASDAQ-listed company, for North America only. Neuren retains rest of the world rights. NNZ-2591 is wholly owned by us, and with that we're going after 4 indications in parallel. All of these indications are orphan indications. Unfortunately, Nina's explained all of this, so I don't need to go through it in detail, but I'll just remind you of a few things. Much more favourable pricing, much less competition, protection once you get to the market, so even if generic companies come and attack your patents, you get these exclusivity periods where regulators won't approve a generic. And because ours are paediatric products, you get an extra 6 months in the US, that's 7.5 years, and an extra 2 years in Europe, so 12 years in Europe. And then also you get a more favourable run through the regulator, and we certainly saw that with our program. We went through 1 phase 3 trial, and really, I was involved in a lot of interactions with the FDA during that program, and they really were very collaborative with us, which is not something you always see in mass market products. So all of that being the introduction, when it comes down to it, economically for Neuren, it's very simple really. There are 3 things that make up our value and are going to drive our value going forward. The first thing is the economics from that Rett syndrome product in the US through our deal with Acadia, and I'll talk about that in detail in a minute. The second thing is our ability to monetize those rest of world rights for the same drug. And then the third thing is to reach the first big inflection point on that second drug across these 4 indications, which is phase 2 study results. That's the first time you see a glimpse of efficacy, and that's really the time when other companies will get very interested in the asset as soon as you've got some of that clinical data in patients. So really for the last 3 years in particular, Neuren has been all about executing as perfectly as we can across these 3 things, and that continues to be the case notwithstanding that the first one is now got onto the market. So let's talk about that first one. It was very exciting to see the name of the product debut and to see what it looked like on the shelves in the box there. On the Acadia website you can see actually the bottle as well. A few really important things about the approval, which couldn't have been any better for us really. So it was approved to treat everyone with Rett syndrome aged 2 years and older. So there was no restriction on age, no restriction on type of Rett syndrome, severity. So really it means Acadia's got the entire market open to them. And we didn't do clinical trials across that entire age range, and it was very carefully designed to provide the data that you could argue for this label, but we didn't know for sure we'd get it until it happened. So that's fantastic. The other thing that's been incredible to see really is that Acadia launched this week, which is barely a month after approval, very quick. And that's because, to their credit, the last 6 months they've been preparing for that. So there was no hint of hedging their bets. We and they were very confident we were going to get approval, and they really have been preparing for that launch that whole time. And following Neuren closely, if you haven't already, I really recommend you listen. It's on the Acadia website to the call they did after approval, because they really explained all the sophisticated marketing, medical information, distribution stuff they put in place to give this the best possible chance of commercial success, and that's very impressive. And maybe, before I talk a bit more about the economics, just a word about Acadia. Those of you who were shareholders back in 2018 will, like me, painfully remember that we got absolutely slaughtered for the deal in the market at the time. No one had ever heard of Acadia, and we only got $10 million as an upfront payment because they had to make a massive investment in phase 3 and the manufacturing. It was a very painful time, but we always knew that deal was back-ended, and if we got to the back end, it would be very favourable to us. We've got to the back end now, and I must say Acadia's done an absolutely outstanding job. I mean, they have ran the whole phase 3 trial through COVID, finished the program barely, a few months later than originally intended, and really it's been plain sailing through the FDA. So they've done an outstanding job, and I'm confident they're going to do an outstanding job commercially with the preparations they've made for that. It really has worked out very well for us. And I think the thing that attracted us about them was how important it was going to be to them strategically. They're not a big pharma company with tons of products where it's got to sort of sit and be prioritised. Really strategically important to them, and it's even more so now because they've had a disappointment in another program, which means really their near-term revenue growth is all going to come from this. So really critical for them to make a success of this, which I think plays into our hands. Very quick word about the data from the trial. The only thing I want to say here is that so it was 12 weeks placebo control followed by 9 months of additional treatment with everyone on drug. And the important thing we saw was that the result at the end of 12 months was better than the result at the end of 12 weeks. And those that were on placebo for the 12-week period and switched to drug saw, again, the same improvement once they had drug at 12 months. So data couldn't have been better. That's exactly what we were hoping to see, and indeed what we did see. So the economics. So, as you'll know, if you saw our announcement earlier this week, that commercial launch has earned us $40 million, which was the payment related to that. We get 1/3 of the priority review voucher that was awarded to Acadia. It's a tradable instrument. They change hands to about $100 million, so we're expecting to get $33 million, roughly, US dollars from that. Could come this year if they sell it this year. It could come next year if they don't. My feeling is they will sell it as soon as they can, but we don't have any control over that. Then we come on to the sales. So royalties on all net sales between 10 and 15%. It's in tiers. So every year, the first 250 million you get 10%, and all the way up to 15%. So you're always at an average between those two rates. And then there's $350 million of sales milestone payments. So as you hit an amount of sales for the first time in a calendar year, we get a payment. So 50 million, 50 million, 100 million, 150 million. So the question is, of course, what are the sales going to be? And one very important piece of information Acadia gave in that presentation I talked about was the price. and it's a high price. So the net price that they expect to get for this is $375,000 per annum per patient. Families aren't paying this. This is covered by Medicaid, which is the government program that covers kids in the US, and then also by private health insurers that people have through their employers. So there's normally just a small copay in some respects, no copay for the families. So if you think about the top of the economics of this deal was always sort of $1 billion of sales, and I think when we first did the deal, you probably were thinking, well, you need Fragile X, a second indication, to be able to make those sort of numbers. But now, at that sort of price, if you do the maths, 2,666 girls staying on treatment would get you to $1 billion of sales. Now, I think in reality what's going to happen is patients will try and some will drop out, so you've probably got to start with a greater number than that to get that continuing patients. But still, for us, it just made the whole economics of the deal achievable. So time will tell. Acadia hasn't given guidance on sales, and they've said they're not going to for a few quarters. They will report the sales quarterly, and I'm sure they'll give commentary around it as well. But we obviously can't give sale guidance until they can. And one thing that's going to impact the immediate use, because on the face of it there's massive excitement about this in the Rett syndrome community, and all along we've worked in partnership with both the families and the key physicians over there, so why wouldn't everyone try it on day one? I mean, but the thing that stops that is that because it's such a high price, it's likely that people will need individual authorization, so the families will need to be individually authorized to go on to treatment and provide paperwork to the insurers, including their proof of diagnosis and the genetic test. So there are 4,500 girls who already have that, and their known names on a register, but there'll be a period where they're working through that reimbursement process. Acadia set up this hub called Acadia Connect for families to register, and they will help them through that whole process to try and get them on treatment as quickly as possible, and then they'll give them every help to stay on treatment. So, but you are in those first couple of quarters, you're going to be going through that individual authorization process. So I think you probably need to wait till about the third quarter before you see the full power. Anyway, obviously incredibly exciting for us and a massive change for us financially. I mean, it really does change the game for us. So ex-North America, I'm probably not going to talk much about this because I suspect I'll get some questions on it, but all I'll say is very well advanced in the partnering process. We've gone from a very long list to a short list. Feel very good about where we are in that process, deliberately not setting timelines over it. But I think we're going to get a good outcome out of that, and I'll happily take some questions afterwards. Okay, I just want to mention our second drug, NNZ-2591. Any of you who've heard me talk over the last few years know I've a very high conviction that this is the thing that could be much higher value, notwithstanding the value we got out of Trofinetide. More than 5 times the number of patients, deliberately going after 4 indications in parallel. It's not a 4 shots on goal, hoping one stick strategy. It's real belief that it ought to work in all of these, and thinking, let's not let this play out over 10 years, let's do this as fast as we can for all these patient communities. Really importantly, we hold on to global rights to this. Finding in our partnering process for Trofinetide in the rest of the world, we've got good interest, but it's not from Big Pharma. I've said publicly before, don't expect to see a Big Pharma partner because they want US rights and they can't have them. Acadia's got them. Whereas this, we held on to US rights in that, and so there are companies who've passed on that process who will want to talk to us as soon as we've got some data. So very important strategically. We're in 3 phase 2 trials at the moment in Angelman syndrome, Phelan-McDermid syndrome, Pitt-Hopkins syndrome, the 4th Prader-Willi syndrome. We're making the final preparations at the moment to start that. First results before the end of the year will be in the Phelan-McDermid syndrome study. The other 2 will follow that, and the Prader-Willi one will be later. That'll be later next year, given that we're going to start soon. So Phelan-McDermid, if we get the results we hope we're going to get out of that, we will go and talk to the regulators about the registration trials. So the whole idea of these studies is collect the information we need to run the registrational phase 3 trial. To design that, go and talk with the FDA, and this time with the European regulator as well, to get their agreement on what we've got to do. At the same time, we've been preparing for phase 3, so one of our learnings from Trofinetide was we weren't in a financial position to prepare for phase 3 during phase 2. So we had a massive gap after we finished phase 2 because there was big investment required, which is, a lot of that was what drove the Acadia deal. This time we're preparing for it as we go, so both manufacturing and non-clinical studies, so we think we'll be in a really strong position when we get phase 2 results. And then we will have a big strategic decision to make. Do we execute that ourselves using the Acadia money to fund it? Do we partner? Could that be a hybrid of, perhaps partnering ex-US and keeping the US this time? Or do we partner, the whole thing? Or do people want to buy the company at that point of view? Do we get, approaches for that? We're eyes wide open to all of these possibilities. Don't need to make the decisions now. We will test the water in all of these things. We're thinking about now, modelling different outcomes, but we don't need to make the decisions yet. A few things have got to play out. We've got to see the results from the Phelan-McDermott study, and we've got to see how Trofinetide goes in those first few quarters. And obviously get the result from the rest of the world partner. So we'll finish on this slide. Massive first few months for us, obviously. Just a huge catalyst that was, but it was always only going to be the beginning. And there's such a lot still to come this year. So we've just earned our $40 million US. We'll be looking forward to when that arrives in the bank. We'll start getting the quarterly royalties. If they sell the priority review voucher, we'll get our hopefully $33 million-ish. Then we'll get an outcome from the partnering process. And then we will start the 4th trial, and then we'll build into the first results from those first 2 trials. So this was always sort of a defining year for Neuren, and obviously a massive start, but a lot more to come, and the team is really sort of revved up to make sure we hopefully deliver against that. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, John. I might start with a question, if I may. The phase 2 trials for the 2591, are they unblinded? And if so, will you be receiving and releasing results as you go?
So they're open label, but they're not. There's no interim analysis, and really what it means is you're real time looking at safety data. The primary purpose of the first trials in patients is safety, so we're looking daily at the safety data, but we're not doing that with efficacy data, and you've got to be quite careful. If you start putting out efficacy data, it seems to bias the patients who are still in the trial, so we won't be talking about efficacy data until the end, but safety, absolutely, it's a real time look.
Excellent. Open to questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, John. Just wanted to ask about the rest of the world in perspective. The flagging is probably not going to be a big fund model because of the ex-US, but would you expect that it would be a one deal, that someone would take the whole rest of the world, or would it be a sort of option of various markets?
Yeah, it's interesting. So in our short list, we still have both possibilities. And for us, there is an advantage to one partner. If we end up with multiple partners, we will have to stand in the middle, coordinate product supply, and all sorts of other things. So there will be a cost to us. Now we're not afraid to do that if that's the right thing. So it will depend on the economics, but at the moment, both are still possibilities.
The people you're dealing with, the patients, are profoundly disabled, and unfortunately they have a similar life expectancy, so the emphasis is, or the difficulties of the families very much. What observable improvements does your drug have to help the families as much as the patients?
Sure, so Rett syndrome is very variable. There's real wide variability in both severity overall, but also in severity in individual symptoms. So you see, it's not like one symptom improves on all the girls. It's different things improve in different girls to different extents. Having said that, I'll give you some sort of the anecdotal stuff. So communication is a huge issue that the families are very concerned about, and girls can range from verbal to some degree, able to say some words, to not even able to communicate at all, you know, with eyes, or, you know, appearing to not understand anything. So again, a wide range. We've seen improvements in all those different types. So, you know, they're able to say some words, able to say more words. If they're not able to communicate at all, there's a sort of connection and appearing to understand directions, and so that's the sort of thing. And another one's hand use. So they have this sort of stereotypical hand motion, which means they can't use their hands for purposeful things. And so being able to hold a spoon and feed yourself, or being able to draw something. So that's funny, you know, you say these things, they don't sound much, but they're massive things for the families, and that's why there's so much excitement out there. Is that I think really any change that means the parents can feel more connected to their daughter, and, you know, help them more, seems a very big thing.
At the back, sir, yes.
John, just regarding your second candidate, I stumbled on a company, I think it's PYC Therapeutics, that has got Phelan-McDermid stage trials, and I'm just curious to know, given they're only going for one, which is in your second candidate covers a number, are you aware of it, and what's the difference? And,
yeah.
And I'm just interested.
No, sure. So that's an example where they're trying to fix the genetic mutation. So on that slide, all these things have different genetic mutations. So their treatment is specifically, and it's very, very early. I hope they're successful, but very, very early. It's trying to improve the SHANK3 gene, which causes Phelan-McDermid syndrome. So therefore, it's not applicable to the others, only applicable to that. Whereas ours is not trying to do that. It's trying to fix the problem downstream of that that's common to all these things. So, you know, companies are working or trying to work on gene therapies in a few of these things, including Rett syndrome. But I think, you know, in the other, it wasn't long ago, and everyone was talking about that's going to cure, you know, it's going to cure it. I'm pretty sure it's not going to cure it, sadly. Hopefully it will improve it, but certainly we've seen some data in an Angelman syndrome trial which looks very similar to ours, so I think it'll be incremental improvement, and hopefully they'll be complementary and, you know, together have better outcomes.
John, you've got 4 orphan indications for 2591. Is there potential to go for a lot of other indications if you get success in those 4 indications?
There is. So neurodevelopmental disorders, there are loads of them. There's probably 100 of them, and they're being discovered all the time. So we've picked 4 what we think are the most attractive targets to start with, but certainly there's a possibility of others in the future.
Hi, John. With the rest of the world shortlist, is there anything holding back your announcement on the winner? And if so, what is the outcome of that? What's holding us back? We've got FDA approval, we've got all the...
It's a good reason. It's a good reason, because we have a shortlist, not one. And the FDA approval changed the dynamic a bit. That's interesting. We weren't specifically waiting for that, but I'm going to be in the end glad we did, because it changed the dynamic. It doesn't directly translate into value outside, because it's FDA's US, but it's certainly increased everyone's confidence and excitement. So we are not yet at the point where we've said, right, the one out of that shortlist is the one, and it's actually better to be in a position where you've got more than one.
So you're waiting for them to up their bids?
So we've also been we've been quite careful in information. So you start off with this huge number of companies. What you don't want is all these companies knowing everything about the drug, and then you're going to end up with one. So we've been very careful as to, as you come down to shortlist, you give them more information. So there's still a bit of due diligence to go through, but it's also a competitive race.
I think we have a question at the back.
Congratulations on the success of Trofinetide.
Thank you.
Following on from a couple of the earlier questions on 2591, in your discussion of the genetic cause of the other one, are the different genes that cause the syndromes that are the indications for the phase 2 trials, are they known to sit in the same pathway or related pathways that your drug acts on? So
Yeah.
you infer if you have success in one, you have a reasonable chance of success in another.
Yeah, it's not quite like that. So, but downstream of all of these mutations is that and there's two sides to it. The protein synthesis to make new connections is not happening properly, and connections are being destroyed when they shouldn't be by microglia that are going around, like Pac-Man. And IGF-1 plays a central role in the normal operation of the brain, and that's its role, is to make new connections and regulate the microglia. So what we're trying to do is the same across all of these. We're using our drugs to try and make the IGF-1 in the brain work properly and improve that, which is not quite the same thing as acting on the same pathway upstream of that. So.
I think we have one last question down front.
I'll echo the congratulations, John, and please pass, I think there's a few shareholders here, our thanks to your team as well for the work that they've done. My question relates to Fragile X and whether you think Arcadia has the bandwidth now to make some progress on that, or is it still going to be on the back burner?
Yeah, I mean, they do at least mention it now. Like they did mention it in their last call, and talked about looking for new indications. So there's a possibility they could have a different indication for Fragile X, or they could go for Fragile X. I still think they're going to, they're focusing heavily on the launch. I still think they're going to make sure that launch happens before they do anything else. But I think it's certainly more possible now than it was before. To be honest though, and particularly when I talked about the economics, I don't think we need it. It'll be fantastic if we get it. And if you think about those tiers and milestone payments, any other indications for Trofinetide, they all get aggregated into the sales. So if you're already earning 14% on Rett, you'll get 14 or 15% on anything coming in. So it would be quite powerful for us. But compared to 2591 and being successful, it's not as important. So I sort of don't lose any sleep over it. I think it becomes a little bit of a bonus.
Just one last question. What's the difference between 2591 and Trofinetide?
Oh gosh, how long have we got?
I don't think we have.
I'm going to do it in a very summary format. So they're different molecules with different mechanism of action. Remember, they're both synthetic copies of naturally occurring molecules in the brain, both of which play a role in the IGF-1 metabolism. So they are, in the end, trying to do the same thing, trying to have the same outcome, but it's by different mechanisms. And then the other thing, obviously, 2591 is a completely different molecule. So from a pharmaceutical point of view, the manufacturing and the distribution and the way it behaves in the body has some advantages, which I've always thought make it very attractive. But in the end, they're trying to achieve a similar sort of outcome.
Sorry, this is a quick one. Can you just tell us the cost of the phase 2s? This is the projected cost.
Yeah, sure. So they're about sort of $5 million each. And so we did a capital raise in 2021, and the whole point of that was to get ourselves funded to get to those phase 2 results and do that phase 3 preparation, whatever happened with Trofinetide. So, and that was important because that means we don't have to cut corners or anything on those things. We've done everything properly. So that's all well within our current funding, even before this cash flow.
Wonderful. Well, with that, if you thank our presenters, please. So thank you, as always, to FB Rice for hosting these events. Thank you to Monsoon, to Rudy and Verity for organising, and thank you all for coming along. Please remain around for refreshments after. Thank you very much.